Do we need to review Zoom procedures, Mike?
No, we're probably good. The only person we have online is Peter Kelman and Alan Goldman, so we should be good.
Okay. All right.
But you do need to ask to get unmuted. So when you raise your hand, put on your camera and wave your hands, and we can unmute you and let you speak.
Okay, so they should use the raise hand function. Okay. All right. Would anyone like to move approval of the agenda?
I will second that.
Right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Great. Okay, comments from the chair. So earlier today, Maria shared the really sad news that I guess Nathan Suter had passed, and she suggested just that yeah. And he had come to the planning commission several times and offered really helpful feedback and taken his time and shared his expertise. So I just wanted to acknowledge his contributions and send condolences to his family. Really sad to hear about that. And I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything or.
I'll just add that contributions to our work and contributions to the community. A really amazing person who was plugged in and really connected, and it's tragic.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah. I don't have any other comments to make. So the next agenda item is general business. So any comments from the public?
Either Mike. Steve Whitaker. I'm gonna try to describe what I see as a let's say errors and omissions on behalf of the Planning Commission, but specifically related to Country Club Road. Right now, we've got a draft city plan delivered to council that says the planning phase is completed for Country Club Road. And you've got a planning director staffer saying that we should skip phase 2 in the Whitenburg plan, at the same time advising the council to adopt the Whitenburg so-called actionable plan. And at the same time, substituting an entire different concept plan, which is what the subcommittee of the council is working on. So what's left to adopt in the Whitenburg plan if you've ignored the advice to you got to do the phase 2 iterative process of planning, and we're throwing out your concept that they built the whole document around. It's absolutely absurd to recommend adoption of that plan because it's no longer Whitenburg's plan if you're ignoring phase 2 and you're substituting your own adjusted concept plan in there. It's no longer Whitenburg's product, and it's deceptive. It's deceptive to the public. It's deceptive to the council to be, and yet y'all are letting Mike drive this train. And so I've done a deep analysis of what it's going to require to get a growth center application approved, and we're nowhere close. And I believe the motive is to point to the actionable plan as if it were what isn't in the city plan for Country Club Road. But Country Club Road is nowhere near walkable distance to town. It's not, it doesn't meet the requirements without me trying to get into the minutia or do a legal interpretation of the requirements. The only way Country Club Road could work is if it were designed as a new town center, and yet no one has gotten on board to, and we probably run out of time to get the legislature to allow a town with a town center to already to have a new town center. So we may just watch this opportunity pass and be waiting for, the next a year or two. But we also have all these competing demands. We've got demands for the unhoused who could live or camp up there, potentially get workforce training and build shelters for other unhoused. We've got Turtle Island needing an emergency space. Those two might not mix very well. We've got a pre-approved Frisbee golf. We've got a city staffer that says the whole area is too sensitive for campers, right? So we've got Feast Farm and this Parks Department's tree nursery. So we've got arboriculture and agriculture. We've got soccer. We've got aspiring private pickleball. And we've got the rec department saying, no, we want it all for ourselves. We don't want a private. And we've got no concept of how anyone who chooses to buy a home up there or rent a home up there is going to have any semblance of traditional expectations of privacy. If the whole thing is a recreational theme park, how does any private property right or privacy expectation accrue there? And yet you've got a planning director who supposedly should be taking his cues from you, saying we don't need to do a phase 2 design. You can't integrate that many different competing needs without a master plan. And the developers, private profit motivated developers, will not deliver a plan that integrates all those needs. So are y'all going to take a stand that we should just forfeit the prime ag soils? Is that the responsible thing to do for food security? You know, I'm just pointing out that y'all have fumbled this royally, and you have a very limited window to devote some time to it and try to get it cleaned up. You know? Thanks.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay, it looks like Peter has his hand up.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm shocked and very sad to hear about Nathan Suter. Kind of makes you think. A couple of weeks ago, I sent, as I often have, an article around that of a town, I think it was Middlebury, that had done was working on a very impressive public-private partnership around housing. And in response to that, Gabe asked me if I had any quick suggestions about ways in which I thought that zoning might be changed to facilitate this kind of thing. And at the same time, Bill Fraser sent me a note sort of saying, well, what do you suggest? So I sent them both a note with a dozen suggestions. And this, but I started off by, I'm not going to go into the suggestions. I think you've seen them there. They appeared on the matrix. I didn't realize they'd get there, but that's okay. But here's what I wrote. I said, you both asked for my ideas about improvements that could be made to our zoning regs. I do have some ideas about changes to zoning, but some of these ideas are very big ones. I know that, Gabe was saying, what are some quick wins? I wasn't suggesting very quick wins. Very big ones, and would need time to discuss, to think about, to ponder with a willing and open planning department and planning commission, which in my opinion, we don't have. I've included some of these in previous emails I've sent to the Planning Commission and in my comments over the past 3 years on the housing chapter of the city plan. So then I proceeded with the ideas. And, I immediately got what I anticipated I would get, which was, answers to why all my ideas were ridiculous or were already being done, or, the usual Bill and Mike debate team. And I don't want to engage in debate about this. So rather than go through this and say, oh no, you're wrong about this, so on and so forth, I just want to ask the commission to consider the following four, if you will, rhetorical questions. And then I want to make a suggestion. Question one, is there anyone on the commission who does not recognize that there hasn't been any significant housing development initiated in Montpelier over the past decade or more? And don't talk to me about the transportation center and the French block. Those were started 20 years ago. They were not initiated in the last decade. Number two, is there anyone on the commission who believes that the efforts of the city government that Bill and Mike are constantly citing have shown any significant results? I don't quarrel with the fact that there have been efforts, but the efforts haven't had any results. Third question, is there anyone on the commission who doesn't recognize that apart from some relatively recent improvements in our zoning regs initiated by you, the commission, have on the whole resulted in the exclusion of new affordable housing over the past decade or more? In other words, while it is certainly true that we don't have de jure exclusionary rules, we have de facto exclusionary rules. The result has been the exclusion of poor people, even lower middle class, even working people, like teachers. We become an exclusive town. And finally, is there anyone on the commission who believes that the city plan that was submitted to the city council for its consideration and public hearings provides a vision for the future and truly actionable implementation strategies? Now, obviously, you know what I think the answers to those are, but I really want you guys to think about it. And I also want you to think about throwing off the shackles of Mike Miller controlling you. He works for us. We don't work for him. You guys need to stand up and tell him what you want him to do. And if he wants to do something else, you need to stop him or tell him, no, this is what you have to do. I really think you've got to stand up and take a much stronger stance and not let him be driving this ship. Thank you.
I think that Ella Goldman has his hand up if you want to go next.
Yes, thank you. Am I being well heard?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Hey, I apologize. We did not get our notes in sooner. Doug is online. My partner has been very sick for the last week or so with pneumonia that's been getting worse. We just finished our comments and we have hired Anthony Irapino to represent us so that we can do a good job really trying to figure out the best way to make our housing as quick as we can and to work on the zoning regs. I guess my big question is, I'm so sorry I couldn't get the comments in sooner. It's just that between Doug and I, we just couldn't do it. May we please make a submission through Anthony sometime tomorrow or the next day? And will that still be reviewed, Mike, and planning commissioners in your process, please? And I guess my follow-up question would be, I know you're not sure where the evening's going to go tonight, so I didn't know if tonight was going to finish. I guess if it's not going to finish, then we can get the written comments to you. Absolute. But we just wanted to make sure that we do get our comments in because we think it'll really help us achieve housing. Thank you so much.
Well, what we were thinking, but Saban pasture is like one of the most developable pieces of land. I would think we'd want their input.
Well, this is also a process that there's some things that we're hoping to get done tonight, but there's a lot that is going to be stretching into the future. So there's absolutely room for more to come in.
Alan, can I ask a question? That on that list, are there things there? Part of what we're trying to do is see if there's some emergency items that could be put before city council very, very quickly. Are you suggesting any of those things, or are most of your recommendations things that could take the, be incorporated into the normal zoning reform process?
Thank you, Gabe. Actually, I would say most of them are minor ones. There's a couple of bigger ones that would be big ones, but a lot of them are just technical changes, or it might be a question about something like singular access, or it might be here. I'll just pull up one document that I've got open. Excuse me 1 second. I'm looking at section 2002, establishment of overlay zoning districts. And it's on page 21 of the regs. And as I read it, it's just not quite clear. So we just have some questions like this. This is one of the bigger ones. But it says 2002A. These regulations establish a design review overlay district as shown on the official zoning map and described in section 2201. 220B, and that refers to design review district in singular. 200B says overlay districts, which is plural, recognize areas that are unique to their environment or built characteristics. These areas require special consideration for the purpose of the regulations. Within an overlay district, and it's singular again, both of the base and overlay districts apply. When I scroll down to 2003A, it says the map, S plural, delineating the boundaries of the various base and overlay zoning districts. It's plural. So I guess now Doug and I have a big question. Are some of these overlays going to be as important as the official zoning map as it says? Because it says overlay districts established in this chapter are incorporated by reference into these zoning regulations and as adopted as part of these regulations and constitute the official zoning map. So now we are a little confused and a little concerned how that plays out. Again, we've been working, really, it's been great to work with attorney Anthony Irapino. He's been wonderful helping us understand some of these complexities. And if we can, Gabe, we'd love a chance just to submit something in writing so it's succinct, to the point. We take up as little time as possible. I could go over some of the other, issues that just seem to be either typos or repetitive, I guess some of the big questions for us would be singular access, how we're going to approach certain kinds of housing and certain densities. We would also have questions about some of the zoning designations. As we get farther into the regs, gentlemen and ladies, it speaks to a taking or 40%, 40 to 60% of the land can be taken in certain situations. We have questions about that. But again, we would much rather give you something in writing, and I'm so sorry we have not. So you can look at it with the sections and true comments and do it in a much more efficient way. I guess we're asking for your blessing to please have additional time to submit something in the next few days.
I definitely think it's fine to submit comments at any time, really, as far as I know about the zoning. And we're always eager to hear them. We might not, depending on what happens tonight, how things flow from here, I don't know, when we would take action on them. But so I would just say, if there's something that you really feel like should be taken action on tonight, that you can sort of succinctly summarize your recommendation, then please tell us now. But other than that, of course, we always welcome written comments and look forward to them.
Well, thank you. We just want to make sure that we're part of the matrix. May we make our suggestions when you're working on your matrix?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll continue to work on this matrix. I'm just saying that it's possible that we will make some decisions tonight, or I think the intent of this meeting tonight was to move forward some recommendations perhaps tonight. And so if there are items that you can quickly tell us, I really want X changed, we could consider them tonight. I don't know if we're actually going to move forward tonight, but yes, you can always submit comments and you will be included in the matrix. The Matrix, that sounds like the movie.
Well,
Yes,
thank you. I just
right.
wanted to.
There's no deadline. Thank you, Steve.
Well, I just wanted to make sure that we were not being impolite when you're working on your matrix that Mike, or whatever it's called, that Mike has put together. May we try to address some of our questions then, please?
You would like to make some quick recommendations now.
Well, I would like to do it at the same time when you're doing yours. I think I don't want to repeat some of the ones that you folks have already covered. If you want me to do them now, I could, but I
Number 5, he just wants to be able to provide input if we get to a number that he also has.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yes.
That's
And-
fine. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think just process wise, so the goal is to have 2 tracks going, one which is going to be for stuff to send forward potentially tonight for an interim amendment, and others that are going to go into the more longer term permanent zoning changes. And so we'll make 2 piles. If we get comments tomorrow, staff will review them, and it's certainly, when this gets warned for council can add these in too. So if there are certain items that go in that, especially if you've found typos and other things that need to get corrected that we don't have on our list, we certainly can go through and add those into the city council list. I'll have to see what the rules are. Interim has different rules, so I can't just, I'd have to look at whether or not, if they make those changes, whether it has to come back to the planning commission. I don't believe it does. I believe that some of those, especially if they're technical or minor, we can always go through and add those into the, at the council level, some of those zoning changes that, if he's got a list, and that would be great. We would prefer to get a list tomorrow, because a lot of these might be things that are either misunderstandings or are just straight things that we need to go and make technical corrections on. So a written list is preferable to us, but if we've got specific items, I think he can comment on them as we're going through the list today.
Because I would ask that you just not move so fast that you're leaving out some key players on the interim zoning. There's no fire burning here that if you wait till your next meeting to forward, it's a higher burden and a higher obstacle to try to get council to change it because they don't have the expertise y'all have. So if any potential big developer in town asks for time to add a few days or a week to add to the interim zoning package, I would encourage you to grant that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking through. Do you have something to say?
No, I think this is an iterative process. So we're starting the process tonight. We can potentially make some decisions tonight, and then we can make decisions in the future, is the way that I see it.
I just thought I heard Mike trying to close the interim zoning package tonight.
I don't know who's.
This was the discussion that we had leading into this, that was the intent. That wasn't mine. That wasn't that was proposed by the planning commission itself, was that let's try to go and get a list together. That's why we moved the Monday meeting to Tuesday, because we might not have a meeting for Memorial Day. So let's go and try to make sure we can get the interim amendment moving. We heard from a number of developers who were being forced to go through longer processes as a result of our current zoning, where a few small changes of 4 words here, changes of things there, we could go through and streamline the zoning. And so our directive that we had was from the planning commission to go through and streamline this process to get an interim zoning amendment process moving forward for the obvious changes that would help. So that's where this came from. This isn't me pushing it. This
Yeah.
is me
No,
simply following your
this all
direction.
tracks.
Yeah, I understood the same, Mike, that Gabe was advocating for, let's have a meeting and get some things done tonight. Now, I personally am, fine if we don't make decisions tonight and we want to we want to schedule a meeting for another time in May or the first week in June. But, I think Gabe was really advocating for, let's get something done in May. So, but I'm certainly, especially as we get more comments to chew on, I think, maybe we don't make decisions tonight, but I don't know what other people think.
Chew on.
Yeah.
The matrix is like hefty. And I don't know how much agreement there's going to be between us.
Right.
So it,
How do you want to tackle it? If you want to go try and dig into the things that are probably interim, because if we just go from top to bottom, I don't know how far we're going to get.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I had the same thought. Well, I was thinking, Gabe did highlight two issues that were maybe the ones that seemed more potential for quick action. Also, I know we haven't really closed the public comment, and James, I don't know if you were planning to comment or you wish to comment as well before we get into our.
On the agenda. So we'll get to the
I
zoning.
was just reading the agenda and it said general business comments from the public about something not on the agenda.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I would like to comment.
May I
Yeah,
ask one more question?
yes.
Well, first of all, thank you. And I don't think we're suggesting that you should not make any decisions tonight. I would never want to hold you back. We were just hoping that the process would still be open so that we could make our submissions to Mike, and then you'll obviously get to it when you get to it.
Yes.
But if you can, but if you can, fortunately come to some conclusions tonight, please vote and do what you folks think is right. We just wanted to make sure we didn't miss the chance for our stuff to be heard.
Okay.
No, and I guess I should have finished the comment that said the long-term process, we're going to be working on this through the summer to continue to have conversations about what zoning changes to make. So the longer process is just that, a longer process. So this isn't the only opportunity or a very short opportunity for the full adoption process. So there'll be plenty of time. So yes, get us those comments. And if you find others, keep sending them along and we'll keep adding them to the list.
Thank
Okay,
you for
yes.
giving us the opportunity.
And I guess I had never appreciated that our general business section says comments from the public about something not on the agenda, because I personally find it a little bit confusing when we have a general business section and then we sort of have a planning commission working session and people are public is interjecting. So
Yeah, I would like to say that if we're sticking to a theme, I would like to hear from James prior to jumping in instead of afterwards, if that's all right and you're up for it.
Process the council just.
How's that, Doug?
The council does allow topical comments throughout agenda items and so it's especially with something like this, it's appropriate to allow comments on the particular zoning change you're considering throughout, because you forget what comments are made at the beginning of the meeting, or you just, I would encourage you to, we're running more like a workshop.
Well, at the same time, it's a commission meeting with a goal. So oftentimes in many meetings that public comments are kept to a minimum so that the rest of the work can get done. So I'm just saying there are multiple ways to go about this.
James, please.
Thank you, James Moore. I took a look at the matrix this afternoon. I think it's helpful to see them spelled out. I had shared one recommended change related to frontage that I don't know if it made the matrix or not. So we could add that in. I think I'm gonna try and limit my comments to be focused on some very specific things. I look forward to participating with you all as you dive in on kind of the bigger picture. With that said, I have a couple bigger picture comments. One, I think that overall, the comments from the staff feel fairly defensive to me, which I was surprised at, and fairly aligned with kind of let's keep things as they are. We like our document of 200 pages or whatever. And I think there's a lot in there that is good. I think there are a number of changes that are outlined in here that could be very helpful. But when we look at things like reduce the number of zoning districts, which I don't think is a tonight thing, you know, the only comment was, sure, we could do away with the municipal district and then the city would be, you know, subject to the same stuff as, same limitations as adjacent lands. And I'll just raise with the commission, I think that is a very unhelpful comment from staff. And that to me was like, really, it's a red herring. It's like the only thing that we could consider doing is getting rid of the, you know, throwing the municipality in with other stuff and making it harder for them. I look at, read all the zoning, I think we could consider combining Res 9,000, Res 6,000, Res 3,000, and Res 1,500 and create a large residential district that has a set of rules and simplifies things pretty dramatically. So I think getting or re-examining the dimensional standards is a must. Again, not a tonight thing. Neighborhood stuff, not a tonight thing. Reducing the number of steep slopes applications that require development review board approval. I think that would be fantastic. I don't know, that might be a bridge too far for this evening. But steep slopes is a relatively new regulation in Montpelier. Most of Montpelier is considered steep slopes. You need very, very little land to be any kind of slope to throw you into this bucket, which means that everything goes to the DRB, which, you know, almost everything goes there. So addressing that, not doing away necessarily with the engineering requirements, but just great. It requires an engineered foundation design stamped by a professional engineer. Fantastic. That would be very helpful. We've raised the major site plan. I'll share with you all, I have 4 lots that I'm waiting to get into the DRB process. But waiting because you all may take some steps this evening. So I appreciate some of the steps you're considering taking this evening and not delaying those because they'd be very helpful. The one thing I wanted to flag and ask you not do tonight, it relates to amend the definition of a driveway. This is number 48. And it seems pretty straightforward and simple, and that's why I thought maybe y'all would take it up and say, oh, that's a good idea. I think it's, I wanted to share with you some real challenges with that. I'm working with Downstreet right now to try and support 4 small single-family homes, affordable housing units in their shared equity program to go in on Heaton Street. That's 4 units. This change would require a subdivision like that. Not that one because it's already far enough along, but a subdivision like that to have to be a street rather than a drive, which would mean that all of a sudden your frontage now is on the street. You front to the street. You don't front to your driveway. So if that becomes a street, it effectively becomes a new parcel as part of that 4 unit subdivision. Then your setbacks are changed. Now you're setting back off the street. As is that project, Downstreet what we wanted to do was have 4 separate lots. But it was recommended 4 separate lots would throw you into major site plan review. So just do it as 2 lots with 2 units on each lot, and it'll be easier to get through because then you can avoid major site plan because it's only 2 parcels. And these are the kind of, and that was a helpful recommendation by the city staff. I'm not like, that's helpful. They made that recommendation. But these are the kind of hoops that developers are going through with these regulations right now, because of the intricacies and some of the complications. I will also share that building to a new street standard is very costly relative to putting in a driveway. So I don't know where you draw that line, but it certainly would be helpful to have some additional conversation on that one. And then the only other, I feel like part of what I get to do is share kind of real world updates with you all. A little view into the life of an aspiring developer. So the most recent one that was a challenge this week was for our quadplex. We had been told by the city that we would not need a sprinkler system. Great, sprinkler systems are very expensive. And the rationale was it was 4 units or fewer. It's like, that's fantastic. But then I met with the fire chief and the code official and was told that we didn't need a sprinkler because it was 11 units or fewer. And that just raised a flag for me going, wait a second, that is a different rationale than I heard last time. So I dug into the code and dug into the city ordinance. And lo and behold, the city ordinance, well, I'll start with the code. The building that we are designing, because it has exits at grade in the back and in the front, but you just need an exit at grade, would not require a sprinkler. Just about anywhere under state fire and safety code. However, Montpelier went farther with their regulations and our sprinkler ordinance in anything more than 2 units. So certainly the quadplex requires a sprinkler. So the challenge there, like, I brought this up and raised this. That's frustrating. It's challenging. More frustrating and challenging is that I spent nearly $4,000 on one of the lots to get a state permit for wastewater. That state permit won't suffice for a sprinkler system. So now I got to pay a professional engineer to go back and amend the permit that cost me nearly $4,000 in the first place. So some of this is learning on my part. It's very expensive learning on my part. And I would say it is helpful for you all to understand what it's like to try and develop some relatively straightforward projects, I thought. I think that was it for my comments, unless there are specifics that come up this evening where it might be helpful. Thank you.
Insights are very helpful and appreciated.
Always be responsible.
Let's go back to the question of how would we like to do this? Do we want to identify, pull out items that we think we can act quickly on, or do we want to go through matrix? What do people think?
I mean, my only concern is if we do kind of jump around to what we think is small, that we might accidentally overlook some of the comments. So if we do just kind of go one through all the rows, we can just hopefully make a quick decision of tabling this for the longer process versus, okay, let's dig into this. That would be my suggestion. I'm hoping that we can quickly identify what we want to dig into tonight versus what we want to table for the longer standard zoning review process.
Just mention, so we had, if we get to a point where we need to narrow things down, we as staff had a quick comment on if there were a handful of things that we wanted to see changed. The ones that we would focus on would be amending the major site plan requirement from 2 to 6, and to adjust the minor site plan requirement. So that way fewer minor subdivision. Well, you said the sketch plan actually might be helpful, but at least those two were, and we base that on, again, there's a lot of comments of things. All this stuff is going to the DRB, all this stuff is going to the DRB, all this stuff is going to the DRB. And so I gave you in here just a breakdown of what was actually going to the DRB. You know, we don't have as much going to the DRB, but that doesn't mean there isn't stuff that's being queued up at this point that could go to the DRB that could change. So again, we a lot of the waivers, you know, discussions of 200-page reports that go to the DRB. That was, had a section 106 report in it. That's why that was a big DRB packet. I mean, so there's certain things that we're just trying to make sure we keep clear on the ground as to what's the reality. And if people see it as defensive, we're just trying to put stuff out there that's, you know, a lot of appeals go to the DRB, and we've had 4 since 2018, 2 that went to the E-court. And so that was why we looked at these, to go through and see where were the jam up points that we were seeing in the permits. So if we look at the actual permits, what are we seeing a lot of? Seeing a lot of these subdivisions, these over and over repeat subdivisions of people that had to go through multiple times, that those could be shortened down to either eliminate sketch plan and go down to 1, or make some of these administrative, and therefore we would just have to have a conversation of what would be an administrative, what we call a minor subdivision. Because it's not just necessarily one, the number of building lots, because sometimes it's actually, are they building a road or not? Are they, you know, are there other issues that are involved in the subdivision more than necessarily it's like, oh, well, 2 and 3 lot subdivisions. Well, 2 and 3 lot subdivision could also involve a building a road. So if you're building a road, we probably need to have more of a hearing, but we certainly could go through and work on those. Those were the 2 big ones based on what we see as actual applications that come through since either 2018 or 2023. And I use 2023 because that was the last time the regulations were amended. They were amended in April of 2023. So that was why we looked at those 2 time blocks. So if we get short on time, that's where I would say if we want to focus back on those would make for the quickest and I think most impactful changes to the zoning if we wanted to get interim amendments moving.
Okay. Thank you for highlighting a few of those changes. Peter, you have your hand up. Do you have a quick comment?
We hear you, Peter.
I tried to click ask to unmute.
Okay, I think Meredith.
Am I unmuted?
Okay, now we can hear you.
All right, my quick comment is that James's comments are right on the mark. when you go to actually develop, Meredith and the staff are very helpful. The problem is that those examples that James gave are exactly the kind of things that I hit up against. And Mike's citing the fact that there haven't been that many appeals and so forth. The reason there haven't been is that people like me just said, I can't do it. I just can't do it. Fine, if you're a huge developer and you've got lawyers, et cetera, you can do it. But the costs involved between surveying and engineering and meeting all these various requirements that Meredith is very good at identifying just scare us off. So saying, oh, we've only had this many appeals and we've only had this many variances, that's not a good thing. That's a sign that the process is too damn complicated. And that's what I hope you guys will recognize. Talk to developers and find out what are the problems. Why does Montpelier have a reputation, a well-earned reputation of not being very friendly to development? Thanks.
Start on the matrix. Um, so the first page has kind of three general comments, or yeah, three general comments. Are those? Wonder if anyone has any comments on this, or
I think they're useful comments. We heard them from multiple developers and people in our comment about the city plan, but they're not for tonight, I don't think.
I agree. Okay.
Although I do actually, that third point about too many appeals or variance requests to the DRB. I kind of, as I just went through the process of building an accessory unit. And as soon as I looked at any code, and I'm a lawyer, as soon as I looked at any code that was confusing, I was like, well, I guess I'm not doing that. Like, it was just kind of like, I'll just focus on what I can do. And so I think that's, I don't know. I think that the issue is that people have to appeal, or that they have to make these requests in the first place. And that alone is like a block, because most people just don't want to bother, especially like if you're like small. What's that?
That's exactly what a developer does. They look at opportunities and they look at the rules and they say, I'm going to Barry.
Well, I mean, yeah, well, that's people like that know what they're doing, but I'm just like a person who bought a house that has a garage.
Yeah.
You know? So like,
Anybody.
like I just get confused, and then I don't know what, you know. So I think like if we can make it so that it doesn't have to be appealed, or variances don't have to be requested, if there's any way to do that, that will alone be helpful, you know. So I don't know, just from my own personal experience, that was how I kind of looked at things.
So the way the system overall is set up is that most of these are administrative, and they're intended to be administrative. So I'll give an example of fences 6 feet or less. If you want to put in a fence 6 feet or less, we'll give you the permit. If you want to put in an 8-foot fence or a 10-foot fence, you have to go to the DRB. We have a parking requirement in some districts, not all. And if you have a parking requirement, the parking requirement says you have to have 1 car per dwelling unit. You can stack them. There's a lot of ways of meeting the requirement. We can help you go through that. If you want to park, if you don't have enough parking spaces and you want to park on the street, then you have to go to the DRB. And so that's where the waiver requirement comes in, and that's where it's not a complicated process, and we can help you go through that process. And in most cases, including in Peter's case, we said we would support and recommend approval of that because of the specifics of his property. But there are places in town where on-street parking is very limited and restricted, and it may still get approved. And on-street parking is one option. If you're walkable close enough to the downtown, you can get a waiver. If you're on a transit route, you can get a waiver. But from an administrative standpoint, we have a rule that says, look, if you can meet this rule, we'll get you the permit and off you go. If you can't meet the rule, then that's where the waiver comes in. Where it gets complicated is and we just had this for the number above, we don't want a big, long set of regulations. So if you want to make all of these administrative, now that was why the comment was there. Meredith, you don't know Meredith's our zoning administrator. Meredith has to literally enforce zoning regulations. She doesn't have the ability to decide whether or not is this on-street parking okay? Unless there's a set of criteria that say in these situations, provided you have 3 of these 5 situations, you can be approved, then we could make it administrative, but that's making the regulations longer and more complex, but it makes it administrative. A lot of our rules are written so we don't have to go. So again, I've said this before, I'll mention it again. When I got here in 2014, 70 of the 140 permits we issued went to the DRB, half. We are now down to 17, 16, 15 a year that go to the DRB.
Out of how many?
Out of the same number, 140 permits. We have the exact same number of permits now as we did in 2014. The number really is amazingly flat. So we've drastically reduced, and again, that was why we're just simply looking at, all right, so what are the permits we have left that are going to the DRB? And these are the ones that are left. And you can see there are some that, you know, maybe there is a thing that says we should allow them up fences up to 8 feet or these other requirements. But there are a couple, I think there's also a driveway standard that we should tweak. That would probably be a good interim change. Just because we get a couple of these that come up where you have to have aligned or you have to be separated by 100 feet, but we're pretty urban and that comes up as an issue a lot. And so if we could just go and say if the DPW director is okay with the spacing, because he's an engineer, he can certify that that's a safe access location, then we can administratively approve that. And if he doesn't, then it could get appealed to the DRB and the DRB would make the decision.
So it's funny you mentioned the fence rule, because I came upon the fence rule in our own property and I had a landscape consultant there. And it was funny because the way she frames it is like, no, you can only build to 6 feet. And I'm trying to hide a retaining wall. And she's like, but what we can do is like build to 6 feet and then do like a vine above that. So it kind of like gives you more like lofty space. But the undertone is like, no, you just can't build higher than 6 feet. Like having to go to DRB to people means like, no, you can't do that. You know, like people don't see the DRB as like a place where
the DRB generally approves everything too.
Really?
So yes,
that could be like a marketing scheme. You know what I mean? Like, because I think people see it and they're like, well, guess we can't. You
All
know.
right. And don't forget the microphone.
I'm just waiting to be called on.
Oh,
Oh, Meredith. So I got hired in 2018 as a zoning administrator. Unless I am horribly ill, I am the one who staffs every single development review board meeting. I think maybe there have been 2 denials in my entire time here. And one of them may have even just been a sketch plan for a big project and they raised some concerns and it turned out that the applicant didn't come back because of costs for blasting and things like that. But usually if I work with an applicant and get them a packet that goes to the DRB approves it. So it's
what people feel happens at the DRB and what's actually happening.
Yep, and that may be because of past history pre-2018. Because I know that there's definitely been I get people coming to me about both the design review as well as the development review board. And, it really is, and it maybe we need to do some more public outreach as of a call us.
Right.
If you aren't sure how to apply the rules and how to make your project work, call us. Because we work with people all the time. There are times when we say, hey, we can't, they're not going to approve that because there's just, I see absolutely no way legally through it.
If that happens, a lot of times I tell people to come and talk to the planning commission.
Okay.
Because you're the first step in trying to get zoning changes, or it's something that ends up in a matrix like this because Mike and I
Yeah.
have made a note in our books. But yeah, there's lots of options.
I know, maybe we just need marketing.
Well, I think, we're striving for both, right? We want both a lot of administrative approvals and as simple and clear zoning as possible. But it is a big nut. So for tonight. So maybe we can go on to page 2. Okay, the first one is get rid of zoning districts completely. Which I don't think we're prepared to do tonight. What? I thought you were gonna say, let's do it.
I did just want to make one comment there. I appreciate all the comments from staff, and I understand exactly where zoning came from and all the positive things that have come along with zoning from the beginning of zoning being a concept. That said, zoning these days in Montpelier absolutely is used in an exclusionary way. And so because of that, I think there just must be adjustments. I am not suggesting that we consider get rid of districts completely, but just thinking about a response to the response, it's different than it used to be, and it is being used to stop projects. And I think that's where we are here right now and doing our work.
Okay, so the next one, reduce number of zoning districts. Again, I think that's a big nut to crack for tonight. Re-examine district dimensional standards. I need some context on this one myself, what this means.
Yes, I'm not sure where that one originated from, but in general, just for history, our current dimensional standards that were developed in 2018, we did an examination of the entire city and measured out what are the lot sizes, what are the setbacks, what are the frontage requirements, all the dimensional requirements. And we went to what we call the 90% rule. So for every neighborhood, so as you see, there's 50 neighborhoods, and we may again eventually discuss whether or not we get rid of neighborhoods, I think in the longer version. But each neighborhood, we looked at every single one of those standards to go through and say, what's the 90% rule? Because prior to 2018, 50, 60, 70, in some cases, 80% of properties, buildings were non-conforming. And then there was a rule that said anyone who has a non-conforming building, you have to go through the DRB to make changes to it. So that was why half the properties were going through this big process. Because everything was non-conforming and everything non-conforming had to go to the DRB. So we went through and revised the zoning and drastically lowered a lot of the requirements to basically make everything 90% of. So what you see as a requirement is should fit 90% of what's there. Now, if you want something different than what's there, then yes, we would obviously have to go through and start to adjust those. But there was a tremendous fight, a pushback that because we were making big adjustments to those requirements, taking 30-foot setbacks and making them 10-foot or 15-foot setbacks, a lot of people were concerned, and we were adjusting the height requirements and we were adjusting the density requirements. And there was a lot of concern that we were just opening everything up to development. But obviously we changed all the zoning. We didn't end up having a lot of development happen. But it did make the process much more efficient. But again, if people want to change the character of the area, then in other words, people would be building closer to the front lines, closer to the sidelines, taller than what is there, then yes, we would have to go through and adjust some of those requirements.
I have a few thoughts about this because I appreciate that work that was done to have everything, or to have the current zoning reflect 90% of what's already there, because that And there's situations where you have these beautiful buildings, and you're like, yeah, but we can't build them today, like, which is very common across the country. But I also think, like, I would think the role of the planning commission is to look at our city and determine what we want the city to look like in the future, as opposed to making sure the city looks exactly the way it does today in perpetuity. So like, what would the city look like in 2100? Like, are we focusing on that? Or are we focusing on like, make sure this thing never changes because it is perfect as is, which I think is like what that current zoning says, that like, that saying that 90% of it currently fits the zoning code. Yes. But are we leaving room for future, what the city looks like in 50 years? And I don't think we are. I think we're saying like right now it is built to perfection, and anything new needs to look like things that are currently there. So to me, I thought when I joined a planning commission that we were going to be looking out 30, 40 years ahead. I've worked with, and on the transportation side, that's kind of how you build bridges, because it takes so long to build a bridge that you have to plan for a bridge 40 years from now, because it'll take you at least 15 years to build it. So if you're building to like today's standards, when you actually finish building it, it'll already be, behind the times. So for like in transportation, that's how people always think forward like that. They're trying to determine future demand. And I would think of the planning commission, sitting up here kind of, we're like literally elevated right now above the people, that we would have that same urge to kind of imagine what the city could be in 50 years. I don't know if others agree with that sentiment, but that's kind of, okay.
That resonates with me completely. Yeah, 100%. And it actually makes me quite excited about thinking about the future and the work that we can do here right now, for making important changes for folks that are developing currently, and folks that are developing here in 10 to 20 years. I just wanted to jump in and talk about the next one that's on here in thinking about the district dimensional standards as well, for getting rid of density limits entirely. And a comment being that density in Montpelier is very permissive. But if we're talking about particular neighborhoods, and we're talking about these setbacks happening in these areas, and height limits happening in these areas, it's hard for me to then picture where density in Montpelier is very permissive. I think that those two things are counter to each other. So when there are dimensional standards that, whatever it is, a 25-foot setback or a 30-foot setback, and a height limit of X feet, that is potentially, I think, not permissive to density. It's counter to density. I think it does stick with the character of a particular neighborhood, and it's likely that you won't have next door to your single family home right there next to you a 6-story building, 6-unit building. But what if in the future you could? What if that 6-unit building is next to your single family home? I think that's what density in Montpelier looks like in the future, personally.
But I think I would just mention that for the most part, most of Montpelier is underdeveloped compared to the zoning. So most of it has infill potential. A lot of it, almost all of it, is going to have infill potential. I mean, every single family home can have 6 units on it right now under our zoning. So there's a lot of potential there. And the setbacks, yes, there are setbacks, but most of them are not fully built out space footprint wise either. I mean, so there's a lot of room for infill to go on, and all the density is doing is providing a ceiling at which, and the dimensional standards provides a ceiling. And again, we can go through and adjust them in districts where we think that's appropriate. Anything in design review does not have a density requirement. Anything, what's that?
Residential.
residential density. Yes, that's what they're referring to as density. Yep. So those are the, so we have large areas of town that don't have density requirements for residential development. And I know there was, and I think it's in here later on about the conversation of having higher height limits in the downtown. And in reality, there are like 2 buildings that are 6 stories. So, why are we going to make 10-story buildings allowed if nobody's building to the 6-story limit? Except when somebody comes in and then we have a whole bunch of 2-story buildings and 1 10-story building. It really is, there's opportunity there for that infill. The density, the height limits were not set to what's the height of the building. The height limits were set to what's the highest building, Capitol Plaza, Pavilion building, 6 stories. And that's what was capped at the limit. So a number of these are, like I said, when you look at a neighborhood, what's the closest building to the street? And that's the setback. It's not where's the setback. And so there's a lot of that type of rule in effect. So I think there's a lot of infill potential. And again, we do have to match a little bit of what's the character of what we're looking for, even if we don't want to talk character of the area, what's the character of what we're looking for in the future, and make sure that the zoning enables that type of development to happen. And I think that's the conversation we'll need to have. I don't think that's in our short-term list, but I think that should be in our long-term list.
Yeah,
Agreed.
This is definitely, the community's gonna want to have input on this, right? There's gonna be a lot of feelings about it. But the idea of infills is awesome, right? There's a lot of opportunity for infill, but you have to recognize, density limits may create cost problems that just make development untenable. Like, when you're trying to build an apartment building, you need to know that your rents that are coming in after you pay your debt service are going to be 1.25 times your debt service after all expenses. There's a certain cash flow that has to come in. And so if we say, hey, you now have to make sure, and we should have parking on the lower levels in a flood zone, right? We need to have parking there, but we're going to cap you at some certain rate. Well, if the numbers don't work out at a 7 or 8% interest rate, that a developer, they're not going to even look at it. They're going to say, move on, let's keep building in Williston where they've raised the height limits, right? And so I think it's awesome to talk about, yes, infill is amazing, but we should have that broader conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And in a current time where flooding does happen, and very likely that downtown Montpelier isn't going to become simply a greenscape. We need to be considering what it looks like to, what do you put on the first floor of buildings? And then this is, I think, what you're mentioning, Gabe, and I'm just sort of reinforcing that. We might want to look at height limits because our landscape is changing. Our development landscape is changing, with flooding being a very real and very serious thing. Not low hanging fruit, but
Say, I mean, when we do get to considering this, I think it's really helpful for me. And I don't know if it's staff or if it's public, can go through and suggest specific areas or specific height limits, like how they see the future of this area. Because I think it's easier to react to some specific recommendations. And I know we just haven't gotten there yet. It's a big idea, but just a general comment. If anyone wants to do that work, go for it. Okay, examine architectural standards. I feel like that's probably also a broad comment that we're not going to get to tonight, but I don't know if anyone wants to jump in on that.
Agree. Let's move on to the next one. We make a decision
Good, Liam.
on.
Keep me going. Let's see. Oh, yeah, this one I thought was really interesting because this resonates a lot with me, to just get rid of the word character, which I find really problematic. But I see that staff has made a comment that as long as you have conditional use review, you have to have.
One of the 3 required.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. If you have conditional uses, then the conditional uses have to look at character of the area, traffic, and impact of community services. You can have more than that, but you have to have those 3. But there is a state law that says you can't apply character of the area to residential projects or certain residential projects.
Yeah.
You can't.
What's certain, yeah.
I would. Meredith,
I don't think it's the number of units. I think it's affordable residential. I think I'd have to double check, but I think it specifically to affordable. It doesn't, there isn't a requirement though of how the character of an area is defined. So my thought was the planning commission could definitely go through and look at how the different neighborhood characters are spelled out and modify, simplify, get rid of some of the problematic language. Those are definitely that might be an easier way to attack this one.
One line of statute, it leaves a lot of room for interpretation. And we could definitely come back and tackle these neighborhood character descriptions.
Right, in our zone.
You know, the other thought that I had on this is, you know, there's a table that shows, you know, what's permissive and what's conditional. And you know, talking about exclusionary and only the conditional go to the DRB unless it's a major site plan. You know, we're discriminating against certain types of housing. If you look at the way it's laid out right now, we don't want certain types of housing in certain neighborhoods. And so it's something we could look at. That would be a different fix, just to say, look, all uses are permissible.
I think they're all.
Okay, do you have a site for that?
On page 235. So currently multifamily dwellings of 15 or more units are conditional in a number of our districts, as are congregate living and shelters.
Yeah.
Meredith, am I right? Like that's all permissive,
Yeah,
right?
there's some, and we could make more. Yes, the answer to your question is yes, we could make more of those permitted. We have, before this, a lot of them were conditional, and we have very much been making more and more and more and more of them permitted. And that was one of the reasons we created the 15 or more multifamily as a group. So a big picture, just so everyone understands how conditional use works and why in the planning understanding of it. So other states have different ways of doing it. They'll call them variances. And so other states, our variances are different in Vermont. So in this case, variances are just for appeals that are of the rules because you can't meet it. In Vermont, the way they set up the rules in 1968 or something, you have permitted uses that are administrative and conditional uses that would go to either a ZBA or a DRB. And the idea is permitted uses are things that you guys, everybody agrees is okay in that neighborhood. And conditional uses are things that would be a maybe that you might want to put conditions on. And so sometimes a good example to use is somebody wants to do a small engine repair facility. Do we want to allow that on Berry Street? We might say, yeah, but do we want to have some conditions on it? You can't be testing engines before 7, but the DRB would review an application and say, yeah, we'll approve you, but nothing before 7 o'clock or after 5. And these are the conditions that we're going to have. So that's what conditional use comes in is it's not a blanket yes, not a blanket no, it's a maybe. And so what are things that go in the maybe bucket? And that's where conditional uses come in. And that's how you should look at them. If you look at the chart, it's like, should this be a yes? Should this be a no? Or should this be a maybe? And that's what conditional uses you should kind of in your mind think about. Because sometimes the maybes are just ones that's like, we could, if we sat down and had a conversation about the particular project and said, yeah, as long as you're not storing things outside, as long as you're not starting your engines at between these hours or whatever. So that's how those work.
I'm still trying to find where the section is. I'm on the online PDF.
Page 55 out of 220. And so my point was just, you know, the character of the neighborhood language only gets triggered for a major site plan or one of these conditional uses. So we could rewrite all of it, or we could just say, well, boy, let's make any kind of residential, option permissible or expand what we're looking at. So we can rewrite all of it too. We could do that for sure.
Yeah, certainly if you made those administrative, then that would adjust that, but that also takes that again. So the reason we put the larger multifamily in there was not because of character of the area, but because of traffic impacts. At a certain point, traffic starts to make an impact on a neighborhood or a street or an intersection. And so if you make it permitted, then we're no longer going to look at the traffic impacts. There'll be no required traffic study. So you could go to Country Club Road. If all residential uses were permitted, Country Club Road will never have a traffic study done. So that's why at some point I think you need to have a line where you're like, we're going to look at this, but right now that line's 15. Should that line be higher? That would be and the impact on facilities very, very rarely comes up, but traffic does come up as an issue, especially if you happen to be near a road that has a significant intersection issue or.
But even that, Mike, you could just have the developer provide the traffic study showing that it meets standards. Like it doesn't necessarily have to go before a board and have all the neighbors tell you how you're going to run over their kids because you're doing construction, which is what happens now. I mean, you could have an engineer stamped, whatever it is, right? Certified to the standard. Same thing with, the foundations for steep slopes. I mean, that's the question. I'm not thinking we're going to solve that tonight, but I'm just saying that's another way of looking at it.
Hold on, I've got
Now Mike has to.
There we go.
Meredith left.
Is it asking to unmute on your end? There it goes.
Oh, I didn't realize you were talking to me. Just to comment on a couple of things that have been being talked about, which is, by the way, I think this is a very encouraging conversation. I think it's really important for the commission to understand what Mike's explanation about why they focused on making the 90% rule. It's because anything that was non-conforming under the old rules had to go to the DRB. But what if instead of creating all of these standards to reduce the conforming, they'd just taken that rule away, that if it's non-conforming, it has to go to the DRB. What I'm suggesting is we need to step back and say, did we solve the problem in a good way, or did it have unintended outcomes that were not very good? Mike says we can put 6 units on any lot. Theoretically, we can, but you show me a lot that can put 6 units in and meet the various standards, the various standards for the district. It's purely theoretical. What you guys are going to need to figure out is how can you do it in a way, and I'm sorry, let me just add to Gabe's point. Meredith, yes, DRB tends to approve everything, but the people who go before the DRB, I have observed, get brutalized by neighbors. Do you remember when the guy from the Chevrolet sales wanted to replace his sign, but because his sign where it was no longer allowed under the new rules, he had to go before the DRB. This was a stand-up citizen who was just humiliated, brutalized by the process. You've got to think about that. I mean, when I went through a sketch review, in my old neighborhood in College Hill, I had to sit there and listen to neighbors lying through their teeth about what I planned to do or what I had done, which was nothing. The DRB is not a neutral territory. And it's something that small developers, people who might do infill on their property, are really loath to go into. You guys need to figure out a way that these things can be decided by staff without creating, Mike said, oh, well, then you're going to have you're going to have something that's even bigger. Well, give the staff leeway. The staff doesn't have to have every single little thing spelled out. And if it does, then do it in a way that it doesn't have to have every single thing. Gabe suggested some ways to do that. I mean, why have all these standards? I mean, we don't have the standards that are necessary, not the standards that make sure that we meet the 90% rule. The 90% rule was baloney. I mean, maybe it made sense 10 years ago, but it makes no sense now. And when I wrote, get rid of zoning districts, that's what I meant. What I meant was there shouldn't be districts where you've got this whole set of rules that you have to meet, or you go before the DRB. As if the DRB is just this, yeah, you go before the DRB. It costs money, it costs time, it's emotionally wrenching. And, people like James who's investing, time is money. And when I wanted to do a development, which turned out to be in an overlay district, who knew? I did have problems with density. I did have problems with parking. And I did have problems with going to the DRB. I needed to move quickly or I couldn't move at all. And, Meredith was very good about saying, oh, well, you can go before the DRB and you can probably get the parking things reduced. I didn't need it reduced. I needed it gone. It was a postage stamp. We need to have a way when somebody's got the money to develop something to be able to make it happen and to get rid of rules that make it difficult or so challenging that, as Gabe said, what did I do? I went to Barry. Because at Barry, they were very cooperative with me and helped me to actually do what I wanted to do. I would much rather have done it in Montpelier. Thanks.
Okay, so moving on to design review district. I think that's too big for tonight. Although it resonates with me to at least shrink the design review district to as small as possible, because it does lead to some grants that are important for the city, but. Okay, the next one, erase last sentence. Is this like a small one that we want to do? I don't know what this.
Meredith put in a bunch of typos and cleanups that she had run into. So there are a number of them that are in here, and she gave me a list of numbers that she was gonna now it's not there. Yeah, 15, 17, 27, 29, 32, 46, 50, 54, 55, and 56.
I mean,
Those were the ones that were technical that she wanted to put.
When we do the zoning, I mean, I know it could be easy, but if we want the city council to just focus on a couple things, would it be okay if we put those into the bigger package, the like typos and stuff, so that we can just have them focus on whatever we think is the most important?
Yes. Yep. And we can, like I said, we'll decide what are the 3 or 4 and leave the typos, because right now we've worked around the typos already.
Yeah.
So
It's just, so that they can really be zoomed into whatever it is that we're asking. If that makes sense to everybody else.
Section 3005, diameter at breast height standard for what's considered.
that's one to
Okay, to
push.
skip. Oh, okay. Okay,
I would say 21, the next one would be one that we should put on the list of considering. That's the steep slopes one. If we could get a quick, it would be nice to have a quick solution to that one
Do you have I didn't quite understand her recommendation. I think it's awesome if we could put something forward, but I don't know. I think we might have a geologist in here, but besides that, I don't know if anybody else really like, Mike, was there staff? I couldn't really figure out if there was a recommendation from you guys.
Yeah, Meredith put this together and I got to review it today, and that was, there are a couple of places I asked her. I was like, in the future, what I sometimes would do is make sure I have a recommendation in there. And so some of it, I think, so like number 2, require a certain square footage of 30% to trigger the engineered plan instead of any amount. So right now, if you have any amount of 30% slopes, and it's surprising where they pop up, they can pop up in very small places, then you need the engineer's report for, I think somebody on Northfield Street wants to put some steps in. And the steps are going up the steep slope. Now you need an engineer's report. Now you need to go to the DRB, but it's relatively small and it's a set of stairs. So that's an example of, if we just had a rule that said disturbance of steep slopes less than 100 square feet are exempt from this requirement. Or we could have something to that effect. And I think we didn't have the time to put together a very specific request for this one, but that would be one way of addressing how can we get a couple of these steep slope projects out, because they occur in a lot of little places and we've got a lot of slopes in town. The intent of the steep slopes when we put it in 2018 was that it was really meant to help capture some of the projects that had been going on. And it was proven correct after the flood. We've got a lot of slopes that collapse. And especially after these rain events, we have a lot of these slopes that collapse. And if the foundations at the tops of the hills or the foundations into the hills are not properly designed and haven't been reviewed by a geologist, then the building has a potential of moving. So we just wanted to have the ability to look at it and have engineered foundations.
Can we just require that though? Can we just require like an engineered stamp design? So why does the DRB, I mean, the DRB, they don't have to be engineers to be on the DRB. I think you've had some from time to time, but it's not like they're gonna re-engineer, something a structural engineer signed off on.
Yeah, and I guess maybe.
No, you don't want that for a set of stairs.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, okay, but I live on Northfield Street and I have a set of stairs that goes up, probably greater than a 30% slope. So yeah, even just for me, theoretically, if I want to do I don't want to pay an engineer to get a signed and sealed document for that either. So yeah, even peeling away some of this language
Would
is a
the
good
city engineer
discussion.
be able to give us a recommendation, or is that out of their scope?
They don't like to be in that because then they end up being in the loop on the liability and all those pieces. So usually what we do is an engineer gives us a foundation, they look at the plans. And so one route is, and again, this may be a problem with multiple solutions. One solution is if you have the engineer, it doesn't have to go to the DRB. It goes to the and you have your engineer stamp something, give it to DPW, they look at it, they say, yes, this is good. We have had disputes between them where DPW has said, no, that's not sufficient. Your foundation plan is not sufficient, and sent it back. So having that extra set of eyes is good. But at that point, why does it have to go to the DRB? We could make those administrative. Then the second one is, do we have certain projects that are just small? So in other words, we're not talking about buildings. Somebody's putting stairs. The stairs if somebody's not doing something that involves the building, maybe those disturbances of steep slopes greater than 100 square feet are exempt. So you might be doing something else. We've had a few projects that are similar to that.
Do we have the ability to put the regulations up on the screen so everyone can see what we're talking about? The section that we're talking about? Do you guys have it on your
Well,
computers?
there's just yeah, I have it in front of me, but there's like many different mentions throughout.
Yes.
for instance, steep slopes. I'm looking at that at the moment, and the 30% is in the category of severely steep slopes, and the steep slopes start in moderate of 15%. There isn't a ton of 30% in town. Like 30% there is in town, but it's mostly the places that we know of that are
Yeah, that's
more and more.
That's right, because at the lower ones, there is a square footage. So you have to disturb a certain amount of square footage of 15% slopes before you need to go into the engineering
Yeah,
report. And it gets up to 30%, and then it's at zero, and then it's none. It's any amount of disturbance at 30% slopes.
Yeah,
And that's what trips people up.
Yeah.
Oh, any amount at 30. and
Any
that's where
amount
you
at
gotta set
30,
it
and then you're
there.
like, oh, I'm going in, I'm doing this,
I
or
gotcha.
I've got a retaining wall, or I've got this really steep slope, I'm gonna put a retaining wall here, and it's like, well, that's.
and I'd like to hear from James, but I just want to mention that I said there isn't a ton of 30% and over in town, but there is a lot of 15% and over.
What's the amount of disturbance at the 15%?
It's not,
4,000 feet of disturbance?
3,020, 2,025, none at 30.
So maybe like 1,000. Right, because that would get your, I mean, I don't know, I'm not an engineer. You could ask the city engineer to say, is that okay? And then if you have a stamped plan,
Can you tell me what's 1,000? Give me an example.
I have no idea.
Well, I mean, that's the thing is I look at these numbers and I don't know how to
Right?
conceptualize.
What is this, 450 square feet is probably this room. Or was it 20 by 20? 400 square feet is 20 by 20. Maybe
But
it's a little bigger.
Is it cubic? Is it talking about like how much earth you're
Square
moving?
footage.
Square foot.
Yeah.
So 8,000 square.
What's like?
On page 80.
It's 89 and
So I'd be good with it, the idea that Mike had about if you have a stamped plan that you don't have to go to the DRB. I think that's a good,
I was looking at, I'm talking about, these are the thresholds for engineer plans. There's a separate set of thresholds for hearings.
oh, really?
Yeah, so the hearing thresholds are 8,000 at 15, 6,000 at 20, 4,000 at 25, nothing at 30. And
Then you just have
and
to
there's
have,
PE plan, PE stamp. plans.
regardless of, because I had a project I did, the slope was behind. Right, but it didn't matter because it was in the lot. We had to go to,
Oh, that's right.
we had to go to site plan.
Yeah, yeah, so the all development requiring hearing is the other piece, yeah, so we have got two pieces. Yeah, it's been many years now, Meredith isn't here to go and throw things at me for making mistakes, but
15% though. You have to go to the DRB.
if you're doing a lot of,
James, 3-08, if you didn't find it.
Okay.
so it's,
More than that. Is
1,000?
4,000.
1,000?
4,000 square.
4,000.
Which is where the engineer plan is required over 15,000.
8,000 square
Right.
foot triggers.
I just feel as much as we'd like to do this tonight, like if we don't have the actual strikeout
Yeah,
language that we can
yeah,
fix,
yeah,
I just think we can't do it.
I think it's something to consider. I would like to hear from James though, about this.
Yeah,
It's all over the regs too.
so
You need to come to the mic.
Are you all familiar with where our city manager lives up on Town Hill? Bill Frazier's house. Right before you get to our place, there's an empty lot across the street from his house. I got that lot. I was like, wow, this has got to be one of the flattest lots in Montpelier. This is fantastic. Lo and behold, I'm right now going to be going to the DRB for a steep slope on that lot. And I was shocked. But it was like cut away. They had done some excavation and then they filled in, they like dug a foundation hole and then they filled the foundation hole back in. So there was like a little bit of steep slope created where they filled that in. And I was like, wow. So I do think that one thing that you could consider tonight is to say, if there's an engineered foundation design, it doesn't have to go to the DRB. To Gabe's point, like they're not structural engineers at the DRB. They're not going to argue with that. DPW has staff that can review that and look at that. So I do think taking that out of the DRB piece could be something that would be an easy kind of strike through. The numbers are,
Sounds like it's all over the regs. Is it, if we did that, could we do that tonight?
I mean, you can give me the, I would call it the legislative intent, and we would go through and draft the rule that would meet that intent, which is that.
And
I hear what you're saying. There's a bunch of sort of references to those thresholds throughout that subsection, and I think we would have to rework.
It's
So
tough.
that sort of cross reference. I hear what you're saying. I mean, what I'm getting from this conversation is, I hate to kick the can down the road, but I feel like we need to really just use this meeting to identify 3 or 4 high priority issues. Go in, then we can all go in, look at those, like propose some red line, some strikeout language or something. So we have something we can really grapple with and put forward to the city council.
Could you take that one on, Mike? Do people think that's a good idea? Like, I know we need to talk more about the smaller projects, right? Like, and we need an engineer. We need somebody to tell us like what really merits somebody real, I don't know, 100 square feet or 1,000 square. I have no idea, right?
I
Somebody.
am not a geotechnical engineer. I work for a geotechnical engineering firm. I am not a geotechnical engineer.
But you know, no, really, like we would need somebody to give us that, but we could potentially ask them to consider that, right? Aaron, to say, hey, what are the strikeouts? To say that if you have a stamped engineering plan, you don't have to go to the DRB for steep slopes. Or the steep slope issue.
Yeah, and I just think that we'd have to just look at that entire
Right, then.
3007 subsection and just make sure that we're cleaning up the language so that
Right.
everything assumes whatever that change
Right,
is.
then
But
they'd
I-
have to do the red lines and we'd have to look at it again.
Yeah, and I think, but
Yeah,
so we can't do those red lines right now, is the point.
No. Yeah, we have 20 minutes.
I'll leave the chair.
Well, I mean, based on what Mike was saying about our intent, we could say, hey, this is our intent. Put that on.
I don't even know if I am not comfortable even.
He's looking at the rules and saying
Yeah, it's hard to.
more
scope out
complicated
the
than
intent.
just,
Yeah.
just a simple strikeout, so.
Mm.
And we've lived with these for 8 years, 6 years, 7 years. So, I mean, if we have to wait another 6 months.
Yeah.
To make that amendment. But yes, I think the steep slopes is an area where we should go through and make a much more careful evaluation of how we want to do it, because maybe, like I said, it's split currently into like 4 different groups. And I'm kind of thinking like, how much work does it take to get those into those different categories? I mean, you're gonna have to do an analysis of how much of this is between 20 and 25%, how much of it is between 25 and 30%, because I've got to be able to calculate the amount of number for this and the amount of number for that. We might opt for a more vanilla 15 to 30 and 30 and above. And that would, but that's something we can't do tonight. That's something, but that I think is worthy of having that conversation, because it'll make it easier for the applicant, because I'm looking at 2 different groups. What are my slopes that are 15 to 30? And what are my slopes that are over 30? And now I can do the calculation to find out how much do I need the hearing? Do I need the engineered report, and et cetera?
And Ariane, I would just recommend, I mean, I don't want to tell you what to do, but my sense is with 20 minutes left, I think best use of our time is just identifying 2 or 3 like high priority issues that we can revisit at the next meeting. And seems like steep slopes is one. I don't know if we can tackle the parking requirements like on an emergency basis, but I feel like we've talked a lot about that over the last few months, and maybe that's something we could take a shot at, really digging in and making some proposed strikeouts for the next meeting. I'm just trying to pull it up.
Yeah, there's a site. I guess
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
on,
Lynn.
just on the steep slopes, I'm not clear like who's doing the work. Are you suggesting that we talk to a geotechnical engineer, Gabe, or?
Well, it sounds like Mike feels like after this conversation feels like they need to go through and make a recommendation.
Okay, so staff is gonna make a
Yeah,
recommendation. Okay, I
yeah.
just wanted to clarify on that.
As that's, I mean, I feel like we all feel like we need more information, right?
Right, yeah.
And Mike, you felt like looking at it again, it probably would take some time to make a proposal.
Yeah, I probably would, knowing that Aaron is actually looking at the rules and he's kind of taking a peek at what the requirements are. And it's not as, some of them can be straightforward. It's like, oh, we just have to add in this section. But if it's kind of like all
I think there was a
intertwined,
lot of cross-referencing.
Yeah, just the
Then-
subsection is just like 3 or 4, it's like 4 pages long, so we just need to make sure
Yeah.
that all that
Yeah.
language is consistent. and
Yeah.
That's easier said than done.
because then you end up with people having to go to the, whatever, going to DRB because the regulations don't connect with themselves. Yeah, and you mentioned parking and I think number 34 was the limit major site plan to six or more dwelling units.
I'm curious if anyone here would want to keep parking requirements. So we have talked about this so many times. Is anyone unfamiliar with it, or
Yeah, catch me up to speed. What line of the matrix are we on?
24?
So currently there's no parking requirements up through what? Res
Residential
1500?
15,
I don't know. Res 9,000, I mean, those are outlying. I mean, you think even that?
I mean, I think I've been clear on this issue. Parking outside of downtown is easy on the street. This is not,
Just don't worry about it.
I don't think. And whenever I see a house and then a driveway and a house, I just think there could be another building right there. I'm very partial here. I don't see the need for parking requirements.
Is Berry Street considered downtown?
Berry Street is what?
yeah, it's Riverfront District.
Riverfront.
It does have a parking requirement and it's been one of the places that's been talked about the most as to, they're like, well, that, as long as we're not removing that because it's such a serious issue for especially winter clearing and trying to accommodate folks. And there have been efforts in the past to kind of narrow the roadways. So you go, some of these Res 9 neighborhoods have wide roads, so there's plenty of room for parking, but DPW is going through and making them narrow because it costs more to keep paving really wide roads. So we narrow the roads. And the assumption is, well, as long as everybody parks in their driveways, and then they don't, and then they start parking on the street. And then we've got complete street standards that say we want to have bike lanes to make it safe for biking, but then people are parking in essentially where the bike lane would be. So you end up with these conflicts of trying to accommodate all the users. And for a time, my thought was for Res 9, I was like, well, if we just had no parking, no on-street parking in these areas, then you don't need to have a parking standard because you have to park everything on your own property anyways.
The other reason I feel like it would be good to not put on our list of the fast track is just because I think there's going to be a lot of diverse opinion in the city, and I think people have a right to have that opinion heard. And so I have, I have some issues. Peter's got his hand up. I know that one project he was looking at doing. We've got a whole issue with the state complex. Like, how many of those are going to be state buildings 10 years from now, right? And it runs right into a Res 6,000 neighborhood. And the Peter's problem with the parking, anybody looking at those facilities, really, it should go all the way to, I don't know if you guys know the Redstone building on Terrace Street, but like, that's like prime. I don't know if it'll ever be converted, but that should be converted to housing. It's like an awesome, but does parking need to be part of that equation? So we've got a lot of that where right now parking is a factor and did cause at least one project to not happen. We know, so again, is that an issue of our zoning districts or is that a parking issue? I don't know, but I do think people have opinions on this one. Although I support you. I mean, theoretically, I support it.
It's okay. You can disagree with me too.
No. Theoretically, I support it.
I think I like cars on. I don't know.
Can we
Moving on.
hammer out what trigger is for major site plan review? What the number of units? We want it to be at 7? going to be at 6, 8,
You're
10.
not auctioneer.
Going once, twice.
Where is that?
Yeah, I mean, the thing I like about the six is that coincides with what the city council did last year with the zoning, right? To say that any, any lot with water and sewer can have six. And frankly, I think also, Mike, if we did make this change, doesn't matter because, both the larger units and the 1 through 4, they're all permissible, but that permissible line should say 1 through 6, right? If we make this change, if you look at the chart of permissible uses, I'll show it to you later, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like,
On the table of uses.
I feel like the 7th unit, at least for the emergency change, can we talk about something more later?
Yeah.
But that just coincides with, I think, what the city council thought they were doing when they did this last year, not realizing like, oh, wait, we kind of forgot the fact that there's this whole other process.
Yeah, you're right. We missed that on the, because we made the recommendation as planning commission to be
For
4.
Yeah.
When it went to 6, we didn't update the table of uses on figure 215. So yeah, you're right. They should have been up to 6. Multifamily starts at 7.
Yeah, I support 6.
6.
1 through 6. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got 21 and 34. Is 32 one that we should do because it's required by state statute anyway?
What's 32?
Add
Emergency shelter as a,
Oh,
to the
sorry,
definition of
everyone isn't
community
looking at the
facility.
matrix. Add emergency shelter to definition of community facilities with limited zoning review.
we have to follow the state law anyways, so.
Oh, okay, so
Sure.
even if it's not under zoning, it would be treated
It
as such. Okay.
takes into effect, but we can certainly
I mean, it just seems like,
add the strikeout, which makes it easier for Meredith.
yeah, just seems
Because-
like one to throw in the mix if we are moving others forward.
That was one of the things that if you want to just split your lot in 2.
What is
That-
the line?
Yeah, what line item was that?
That is 41. Add administrative subdivisions for 2 parcel infill subdivisions.
I'm good with that.
Oh.
And I think so that was what was recommended by somebody in the public. What was recommended by staff or the comments from staff was we already allow, or it's allowed under statute, under those 2 sections, to allow approval of minor subdivisions, but we would have to define what minor is. Is that only where no need to extend sewer and water and roads? So that kind of gets to some of the infill within a certain feet of infrastructure. So I think in some cases,
Where utilities are out the road.
yeah, I mean, where there's no new roads. And yeah, I mean,
I think that's one of those, you could craft the language and we would, but that's the intent, right? Are people good with that?
Existing infrastructure exists.
What was that? Say it again?
Oh, no, I'm just trying to, instead of trying to say, oh, like where there's a road and sewer and water, I was just trying to think of some language, where infrastructure currently exists, something along those lines.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, so I think the where infrastructure exists is pretty easy to interpret. The no new roads, I think, is pretty straightforward. So people could do shared driveways, but if you're going to start building roads, then usually we need to have something in there. I mean,
New driveway is.
driveway's not a road,
it's not.
so
So a new driveway.
A
not
new-
just shared drive- New driveway.
a new road. So if you were to go through and say, I've got a 6-acre parcel and I'm gonna run a new road in and subdivide 6 building lots. It's like, well, because you're building a road, we're gonna want to have hearings and talk about it. I mean, there's not a requirement. We can set the minor wherever we want. We could have minor be 10 lot subdivisions. And again, but the requirement being we've got to have enough detail. If it's going to be administrative, we have to have enough detail for Meredith to do it. And I think some of these ones where
getting to that-
infrastructure is there, if you're not building a road, if you're just doing shared driveways and up to 3 parcel subdivisions.
I mean, getting to that point, right? If they meet, like, let's say there was a really long lot along an existing road front, like what is the issue of like, as long as the infrastructure is there, what difference does it make? Because they still have to meet all these other requirements. They have to have the right frontage and they have to have all these other things. Why trigger? I mean, I don't know. I'm just wondering why we trigger anything with that. It's like, look, you got land, you want to subdivide it, please do. Like,
Well,
like,
as long as it
let's
meets
get more.
the acre requirement.
Right, it would have to meet all the other requirements anyway.
Are you suggesting that it could be, you could subdivide it however many times you want, as long as all the other
You could
requirements are met?
subdivide it anyway, unless you met the requirements.
Yeah.
Right, so. I wonder why we're even questioning a number.
So some people
Because the
going
big
back
ones
out
are you're doing a road, like the big ones are you don't have the frontage and therefore you have to build a road. And that's what requires all these other, hey, let's get a lot of community input. But if it's an existing road and you know, somebody just wants to put those lots on the market, like, I don't even know why that's complicated.
Yeah, that was why I was just looking at the lower at a lower number. And so big picture, what some places, AOT and other places would start looking at is in some of these sections, particularly I'm thinking Elm Street, that might be the only one. You'd want to be careful about if somebody were to want to subdivide and take 1,000 feet, I've got 1,000 feet on, and I'm just going to chop them all up. What AOT would want from a traffic standpoint is, you know, you're not in the urban part. You're not in the downtown. We're in the downtown. You can chop these up. If you're out on Elm Street, we've got traffic flow. We want to limit the curb cuts. So we want actually to have people build roads, and force people to put in a road here for a small subdivision, put in a road here for a subdivision, because it makes the traffic flow safer for drivers on the road, and as opposed to having a whole string of driveways. In some cases, you're kind of stuck. That's the only option you have because it's really narrow. But if thinking just big picture, if you were to talk to AOT about how to do access management, they would be talking about in these areas where this is designed to be a thoroughfare, that we should be limiting the number of curb cuts to limit the number of conflict points. So
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And technically, is there a different number than 2 then, for instance? You know, not, you know, just change the upper limit of what that parcel subdivision is.
yeah, but I think for most of our infill parcels that we're talking about, like James's things, these are all infill. These are within, and it may be something that we just go and say outside it, except for in the rural district. You know, in the rural district, this exemption doesn't apply.
Yeah.
That would be one way of tackling it.
Are there limits to how many people can share a driveway? I think
There's a rule for when it switches
to a road.
and some of it switches to a private road. So again, there's E911 rules, and we try to keep these things to run the same, so we don't have, well, it's a road if you're talking to this person, and it's not a road if you're talking to this person. So we tried, I think that was one of the suggestions that Meredith had in here, was to sync E911 up to ours, just because we want to make sure when we're talking to one group, it's the same as when we're talking to the other group.
So Ariane, it sounds like we probably need the planning staff to come back with actually like lined out language with some recommendations.
Okay, so for 21, 34 and 41. Is that what we're talking about, for the staff to come back with some recommendations on those? And then, I mean,
I'm not
for all of those.
oh, sorry, you're not looking at the numbers.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm looking at the numbers. So like,
Steep slope.
yes.
The 6 units, and then what was this last
Yeah.
one? Simple
Yes,
subdivision.
okay, yes, that's the same.
Okay.
And what were you saying?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you were lumping them all together or if you were just talking about the subdivision.
No, those 3.
Okay.
I mean, it sounds like well, at least two of them. Maybe you could say the 6 unit is like really easy and we'd all just agree with that and just like move that forward. We could do that. But the other ones, it sounds like we need to see the language.
I don't know why I'm feeling this way, but I would love to have a change that we can make today. I'd be very happy with the 1 to 6 units. It's something that
We'll move it, Tim.
it's something that we all I feel like we all agreed on.
I mean, we could, but I think if we have to move these to city council, I
Okay.
personally think it makes sense to.
Got it.
But sorry, I know
No,
you
no.
want to do
Don't
something.
apologize.
We've got
Right
the,
now,
we've got the
and
short
table
list
it,
down.
'cause it's
That's
been
what matters.
approved. We don't talk about it anymore.
Oh, that's true. We could do that, I guess.
We could do
Or
it.
does that even make sense? I don't.
What's
We
that?
could move that right now, and then it would be a decision that we have made, and we can table it, and we don't need to discuss it again.
But we still need to, but they're gonna come back. Language stuff.
Okay.
Trust me, I want to see stuff move too, but let's get all the red line stuff at the next meeting.
Yeah, and I would just say too, I mean, if members of the public have comments about these sections, feel free to submit them as well. As well as staff, technical, specific recommendations. I think that's helpful. So just on our next meeting, I'm actually out of town on the week of the 26th, but I feel, people could, as long as somebody's facilitating the meeting, I'd meet. Yes, James?
Facilitate the meeting.
Oh. I don't know that you want that. I just wanted to raise, I think I heard the staff suggest that there was at least some on staff who also thought that line 42 there, making sketch plan optional,
Oh, that's true.
was something that might get on that short list. So I didn't want you to adjourn.
Thank you for bringing
Okay,
it up.
yeah.
I would like to add that to the list. It was brought up by staff at the beginning, and I think we should move forward with that.
So so really the decision for this one is that we're not sending anything to city council at this point. We're to develop strikeouts for at least these 4, and if we get anything else that comes in that might fit the bill from Ellen and Doug, or we've got other technical ones that we can put on a quick one, and we'll get a strikeout version for at least these 4.
Can I ask what the 4 are? I've marked 5 and I'm wondering if we put remove minimum parking requirements as one of those.
Think that was one that did not make it.
Okay, so we're not gonna worry about that one.
Not on the,
Okay.
yeah, it'll be the long-term discussion because the public feels very strongly about parking.
Okay. I'm on the same page now.
Okay, so I'm totally happy if you guys want to meet the week of the 26th, and I'll.
Yeah, that's Memorial Day.
It's Memorial Day.
Yes, but I mean, during that week, I'm gone that whole week, so.
What for our next meeting? Or is it the second?
June,
9. If we just totally skip that over, which I'll be out of town for June 9th.
Oh.
just
Oh, okay.
FYI.
I could do the Tuesday too. That's the
27th.
27th.
Yeah, that's what.
I can too. Would we have a forum?
I can.
I can.
so just Ariane's the only one out.
That's fine.
Fun.
No, usually this room is open. That's why we're here tonight.
Okay.
So we will meet on the May 27th. I will get that announced. And we will work on a strikeout copy. And we will skip the minutes.
Somebody want to move to, oh, yeah, and we skipped the staff memo, but we could put that on the next agenda. I don't think that's urgent. If we have time.
Should that go out? Do you want to forward that?
Oh, it's already gone to city council. It's the FYI that. Well, the mayor asked me, and so I put that together and sent it back, so.
I'll move to adjourn.
All right, all those in favor? say aye.
Aye.